the SNP's Plan C, if you like, because we've had Plan A, which was the gold standard referendum similar to 2014, which we know we're not going to get. Then there was Plan B, which is the referendum held by Holyrood and passed into law by the Scottish Parliament and then held next year. Now that is looking like it's hanging in the balance, and that only leaves Plan C. Now, one of the interesting things, not often the BBC actually says something which I agree with, but in this case I did agree with it. And what was said in this BBC article this morning was that this was out of character for Nicola Sturgeon to articulate the idea of a plebiscite election, especially one during a British general election, was a curious departure. It's not in character for Nicola Sturgeon to roll the dice on something as, let's say, as risky as this. This is more of a gamble. But also, it was very curious, and this was the thing which was highlighted in the BBC article, that Nicola Sturgeon set the bar impossibly high. More than 50% of the vote share for pro-independence candidates at an a British general election at some point in the future seems like an impossible ask, and a very, very curious thing for the First Minister to say. That leads me to believe that this is nonsense. I don't think the SNP has any intentions of holding any kind of plebiscite election in a British general election, because that would be crazy. However, on the other hand, there is the chance of holding a Scottish general election as well. Now, an English or British general election is unlikely to be held before 2025, which is an awfully long time away. It's 2 years after the target date of next year. So you have to ask yourself, why would the SNP articulate this particular Plan C when it makes so little sense? Even the BBC doubt that this is a good idea. And you have to wonder whether this has just been put in there as a bit of a red herring. It's much more sensible for the Scottish Government, if they are going to go down this route C of a plebiscite election, to of course have it as a Holyrood general election. But that can only happen if the entire Scottish Government, that's all of the SNP and all of the Greens ministers in government at the moment, and possibly all of their MSPs, were all to resign at the one time. This would force a Scottish general election. It would be a snap general election, and during that it would be possible to stage a plebiscite election. Now, the chances of a plebiscite election succeeding in the Scottish parliamentary election are far higher for a couple of major reasons. One is the vote system is much more likely to produce more than 50%. At the moment, the SNP was polling in the last general election 47.7% of the popular vote. Now, if you add the Greens to that and you create an alliance, an independence alliance party, possibly including ALBA and the Socialists and any other of the lesser known parties and individuals, then you've got definitely more than 50% of the popular vote. And because the voting system in Holyrood is much more representative, it's far more likely that we would win. And there's also the other interesting thing to remember about a plebiscite election in Holyrood, and that is that the franchise is far wider. In other words, far more different types of people are allowed to vote in the Scottish general election. In a British general election, no European Union nationals are allowed to vote, and certainly no 16-year-olds are allowed to vote. But if we add them into the mix, and we have a plebiscite election at the Scottish Parliament, we have 200,000 or so European Union citizens who are now settled in Scotland who would be able to vote. And most of them now would vote for independence because it promises a route back into the European Union. And then we have approximately the same number, just under 200,000 each year, of new 16-year-old voters who come of age, basically. And so long as we encourage them all to register to vote, that's another almost 200,000 potential yes voters. And we know that about 75% of 16-year-olds have historically backed independence, and that could be higher now. So both of these demographic groups represent 400,000 votes. And even if only 75% of that 400,000 vote yes, that adds a tremendous amount of voting power into the pro-independence campaign. Now, in other news, somebody commented, I think yesterday, that there were several ingredients that a new independent Scotland would require. But two of the ingredients which are not often linked together, but when you think about the way this might work, you can see the sense in it. The first one was having a currency already organised and ready to go. In other words, having a central bank on the starting blocks even before the referendum voting begins, and also having the ability to capitalise that central bank by provisionally issuing Scottish government bonds so that other people, investors across the world, can invest in the future of Scotland as an independent state. Now, that would be very attractive to many investors because Scotland is sitting on an absolute pile, a goldmine of natural resources, which of course the British state covets and is currently pilfering. So there is that, first of all. But the interesting thing about having the currency and having the bank capitalised is it means that we could instantly pay for our own defence forces. Now, one of the things which is often neglected in independence is defence of the new state. The first duty of any government, of any country, is to protect its citizens. And to do that, you need an army, a navy, and an air force. And in Scotland's case, it would need a big navy because most of our assets, the ones that we really value for the future, lie offshore. And these are, of course, our offshore wind farms and our newly expanded tidal energy arrays as well, all of which are offshore. Not to mention, of course, the traditional oil and gas fields, which would, of course, fall back under the control of Scotland after independence. And those would need to be defended not against the Russians per se, but possibly against British attempts at annexing parts of the oil fields, for example, or even annexing things like Faslane, their British submarine base, at which the UK is intending to base all of their submarines. And I'm not talking just about the nuclear ones, but their entire fleet. They want to put it in one place, which is a crazy defence strategy if ever I heard one. One hit on Faslane and every single submarine in the UK fleet could be put out of action. However, we do need a defence force, and having the currency up and running, having the central bank already capitalised and issuing government bonds would give us the money to hire a new army. And that would mean probably asking for volunteers who are currently serving the British Army in Scotland to convert over to the Scottish Defence Force. And that means also procurement. That means the manufacturing of new ships, of new aircraft, and of new land vehicles. So we're thinking about things like tanks and multiple launch rocket systems similar to the ones that have been sent to Ukraine, not to mention air defences and all sorts of other things. So there is that. It is necessary, and it's an interesting point that someone was making, linking the central bank and currency with the ability to set up a new defence force. Now, having mentioned already the issue of the general election and all the rest of that, I'm going to leave that aside for a moment, just to remind you that this weekend, All Under One Banner are holding a major independence march in Inverness. I believe it's tomorrow, and you can find details of that on the All Under One Banner website. Now, also, as well as that, as I've mentioned many times before, there are lots of different things happening across Scotland. Marches, protests, rallies of all kinds, all over the country, constantly throughout the year. And not to be outdone by Inverness, Perth has decided to stage a cost of union protest in Perth on the 16th of August. This is something else you will find details of online. This is a protest against the union. It's not against the cost of living crisis, it's against the cost of remaining in the union while the union is in such a mess. So we can see there's multiple events happening all across the country. Independence support is going up, and I see no reason, in fact, why we should be downhearted at the moment. As far as I can see, to round things up, The SNP's policy, this Plan C of having a plebiscite election inside the UK general election, possibly in 2025, just seems ridiculous. And if it is a red herring, then it's certainly confusing the BBC. In the meantime, the best thing that we can do is actually just keep the rest of the United Kingdom's media guessing, because they have no idea what the true plan is. Also, I mean, this business that Alex Salmond has made a point of saying is that, you know, we've got things the wrong way around here with the current strategy. But if I'm right, then this strategy, if it happens at the right moment, will confirm what we already know, which is that we're not in a voluntary union. And if we're not in a voluntary union, as Mr. Salmond says, we need to hold the referendum and then challenge the UK, not across the United Kingdom, not in the UK's courts, not in English courts or even Scottish courts, but in the international courts of justice. And that means we would have other countries looking at the way Scotland has tried its best to go through the normal democratic processes and having all of them denied by the British state, leaving only the action I've described, which is to hold a referendum next year, regardless of whatever the Supreme Court says, and then challenge the United Kingdom to basically to deny that we have the right to do this in an international court. Now, the international courts, of course, are not going to be vastly in favour of ruling in the United Kingdom's favour, because they know the United Kingdom has become a bit of if not an autocracy, it's certainly heading towards dictatorship and very far right, racist, isolationist policies, which Scotland doesn't actually agree with and voted very strongly against, particularly in 2016 when the Brexit referendum took place. So I think the situation at the moment is confusing for many of us, and most of us don't really understand what this policy is about, or where it will lead, or when we'll get to vote. But I think this is deliberate, and if you look at any conflict where a small country is trying to extricate itself from the clutches of a larger neighbour, which is basically ripping off its natural resources, this always happens. The larger country denies the right of the smaller country to vote on anything, and eventually that smaller country needs to take a decision, and it needs to go to the international courts and go to international institutions like the United Nations to get a ruling. And as Mr. Salmond pointed out on the 6th, this is the way that he would have done it. So there are disagreements about the methodology here, but at the end of the day, we have to have a vote of some kind. Whether the UK deems it illegal or not is immaterial. We must have it, and then we must challenge the United Kingdom in an international court. I agree with Mr. Salmond on this. The strategy that the SNP is using at the moment is not necessarily wrong, and I think most of it is designed to confuse the opposition into thinking one thing when they actually don't really know what's going to happen at all. And the SNP is obviously not going to say what its true Plan C is. I have a feeling that there may be more than 3 plans. And in fact, as I've already mentioned, there are 6 different routes to independence, and all of those will be outlined by the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group in its upcoming papers, and all of those will of course be sent to the Scottish Government, the Scottish Parliament, for their information. So I don't think we have anything to worry about. I think this is all a case of just holding fast and keep protesting. More and more people out on the streets, more people converted to the cause of freeing ourselves from this toxic union, which is basically bankrupting the entire country and plunging everybody into poverty. It's a no-brainer for most of us. So that's where we're at the moment on the so-called Glorious 12th. Thank you for being with me today. I will be back again, I hope, on Sunday. In the meantime, keep the faith, and remember that not everything that we're hearing is true. Not everything that the SNP says is actually going to happen, and not everything that the BBC says or anybody else in the UK media says is going to happen either. It's a mystery at the moment, and it has to remain that way until action is taken, and that means we wait for the Supreme Court to be instructed by the UK government to deny Scotland its democracy, and then the clock starts ticking. But until then, we have to keep protesting, as I've said. So I will see you again on Sunday. In the meantime, enjoy this excellent weather. And remember, we are going to win this time, regardless of the method that's used. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.